At 6:52 in the morning on a Thursday, a control-obsessed HOA president made a $2.7 million mistake that would land her in federal prison for 10 years. And it all started with a pair of bolt cutters and the wrong government vehicle. The sharp crunch of those bolt cutters slicing through my security chain shattered the quiet suburban morning like a thunderclap. That metallic snap was the precise moment Patricia Ashford transformed from neighborhood association president to federal criminal in under 35 seconds while I was overseas on deployment fighting international drug operations. This power-hungry suburban ruler decided my ugly vehicle had to disappear. What she didn't realize, that Jeep was federal drug enforcement property, loaded with $375,000 of classified surveillance equipment. And I'm the type of federal officer who specializes in dismantling major criminal networks. She believed she was towing away some random soldier's truck. She actually committed federal crimes that would make organized crime leaders jealous. What would you do if some neighborhood dictator attacked your property while you're protecting our country overseas? Where are you from? Tell us in the comments below. And if you're loving this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more. My name is Marcus Tank Rivera, and 5 months ago, I thought inheriting my grandmother's house would be a blessing. Man, was I completely wrong. Cedarwood Estates. Picture-perfect suburban nightmare where every house is the identical shade of tan. Sprinkler systems activate on automated schedules, and the smell of fresh pine chips can't hide the stench of privilege. Monthly neighborhood fees, $172 for maintaining standards. Reality, funding some power-hungry busybody to make your life miserable. I'm Army Reserve Military Police, recently accepted into a federal narcotics task force. Grandma Maria's house was supposed to be my financial safety net. Lease it during overseas assignments. Build wealth. Honor the woman who raised me after my parents were killed in a highway crash when I was 14. That house still carries the scent of her homemade tamales and vanilla. Every creaky board holds memories of her teaching me how to stand up to challenges. Mio, she would say, you face bullies, but you do it properly. Enter Patricia Ashford. Imagine a 55-year-old real estate broker who drives a pearl-white Lexus SUV and measures lawn height with an actual ruler. 9 years as neighborhood president has turned her into a suburban dictator. Her husband Gerald serves on the city council, making her believe she's untouchable. This woman sends violation notices for holiday decorations in March. 4 weeks into my overseas assignment, the email lands in my inbox. Violation notice. Unauthorized commercial vehicle parking. My government-issued Jeep Wrangler, clearly marked with federal law enforcement decals, was apparently destroying the aesthetic. Patricia's interpretation of neighborhood rules. Work vehicles banned from residential driveways. Here's what she missed. That Jeep holds $228,000 of surveillance equipment for ongoing cartel cases. GPS tracking systems, encrypted radios, hidden cameras. Federal assets that require agency authorization to relocate. The penalty, $58 daily, piling up while I'm dodging danger overseas. My sister Isabella, sweet elementary teacher Isabella, tried reasoning with this suburban tyrant. She went over to explain I was deployed, provided copies of my military orders, even suggested covering the Jeep with protective covering. Rules are rules. Patricia responded coldly, staring down at Isabella like she was nothing. If your brother refuses to follow basic neighborhood expectations, perhaps this community isn't suitable for your family. That phone conversation with Isabella still echoes in my ears. The trembling in her voice as she sat in Grandma's kitchen. Tank, she threatened to place a lien on the property. She mentioned Gerald knows officials at the education department, and that defending you might affect my career. Isabella uncovered the pattern. The Patterson family, he's a Marine, received citations for his motorcycle being excessively loud. Maria Thompson, Navy spouse with a deployed husband, was penalized for lawn decorations being unprofessional. Every military household in Cedarwood was being targeted, but here's the shocking part. Patricia's violations were completely fabricated. I had Isabella examine the actual neighborhood bylaws, buried in my grandmother's documents signed when she purchased the home in 1989. Government vehicles were specifically excluded. Emergency services, military personnel, law enforcement, all protected. Patricia was literally inventing fake rules, betting on residents being too frightened or uninformed to verify. The neighborhood existed in terror. Neighbors whispered across fences, but wouldn't speak openly. Patricia had created an environment where questioning her authority meant becoming her next victim. Gerald's political connections made resistance appear pointless. That's when I understood what I was truly facing. This wasn't about parking or home values. This was systematic harassment of military households by a corrupt neighborhood board with political backing. The texture of sand between my teeth during that call with Isabella. The smell of diesel and nervous sweat mixing in 130-degree heat. The echo of my grandmother's words in my mind. Face bullies, but do it properly. While I was serving abroad, protecting American communities from narcotics. Some suburban princess thought she could destroy my family's heritage through invented penalties and intimidation tactics. Patricia Ashford had just started a war with the wrong federal officer. She assumed she was dealing with some helpless military household. What she failed to understand was that I specialize in destroying criminal operations. And her little neighborhood scheme was about to become my next investigation. Patricia's next move came 58 hours later, and it was pure suburban warfare. A certified letter reached Isabella's mailbox demanding immediate vehicle removal or emergency towing within 28 hours. Not 2 days, 28 hours. This woman was attempting to confiscate federal assets while I was stationed overseas. The letter copied to Gerald's council office and local law enforcement claimed immediate safety and health violations and urgent neighborhood deterioration. Complete lies, but dressed in official letterhead with legal-sounding language meant to frighten. Isabella called me from Grandma's kitchen, and I detected the panic in her tone mixing with the familiar creak of those aged floorboards. Tank, there's a tow truck circling our street. The driver keeps examining your Jeep, like he's evaluating it. The scent of Grandma's vanilla candles couldn't cover the smell of terror in Isabella's voice. This was psychological warfare, suburban style. That's when I unleashed my first response. I reached out to JAG Judge Advocate General Military Attorneys, who specialize in devouring constitutional violations for breakfast. Staff Sergeant Catherine Miller reviewed my case documentation, and her face shifted from professional curiosity to justified anger. Rivera, this woman just threatened to confiscate federal law enforcement assets. That's not a neighborhood violation. That's a federal crime. Here's something most citizens don't understand. The Service Members Civil Relief Act doesn't just shield military members from contract conflicts. It specifically forbids harassment of deployed personnel's property. But more importantly, my Jeep isn't simply my vehicle. It's federal law enforcement equipment owned by the United States government. Miller immediately submitted a formal complaint with base leadership, activating something beautiful, a federal military liaison investigation. Suddenly, Patricia's little power game was on the radar of individuals with genuine authority. But here's where I discovered the real plot twist. And it made everything deeply personal. Isabella started examining Grandma's old neighborhood documents. And buried in a stack of meeting records from 2021, she located a smoking gun. A letter from Patricia to the Town Planning Board recommending against military housing support programs in Cedarwood because transient military populations don't sustain long-term community investment values. Translation: she'd been working to exclude military households from our area for years. The texture of aged documents crumbling between Isabella's fingers as she photographed proof. The sound of her shocked gasp when she grasped the extent of Patricia's discrimination. Tank, she's been systematically attacking every military household that relocates here. The Martinez family received violations for their child's bicycle being stored incorrectly. The Williams household was cited for excessive volume, when their infant cried during nighttime. This wasn't random neighborhood tyranny. This was organized discrimination with political support. Gerald had a construction project pending. Premium condominiums requiring neighborhood approval for planning changes. Military households, with their unattractive work vehicles and unpredictable deployment schedules, damaged the exclusive community marketing strategy. Isabella's teaching instincts activated into high gear. She started connecting with other targeted households, creating a network of documentation. Every fabricated violation, every threatening message, every intimidation approach. She was accidentally constructing a federal discrimination lawsuit. But Patricia escalated again, and this time she crossed a boundary that would destroy her. The sound of expensive shoes tapping on pavement echoed through Isabella's phone as Patricia performed her own property inspection of Grandma's house. She was recording every detail, photographing my Jeep from various angles, measuring distances with a tape measure. Your brother's military duty doesn't excuse neighborhood non-compliance, she told Isabella with that patronizing tone that makes you want to introduce privilege to reality. Perhaps your household should reconsider whether this area is appropriate for your situation. Code language, for we don't want people like you here. My response was quick and crushing. I remotely triggered the GPS surveillance and security features in my Jeep Standard, gear for task force work. The information was perfect. Patricia had been trespassing on my land 21 times in 5 days, photographing federal law enforcement equipment without permission. That's not just harassment. That's possible espionage. When my task force commander, Captain Jennifer Martinez, learned that some suburban neighborhood dictator was monitoring federal narcotics enforcement gear and threatening military households. Her answer was beautifully straightforward. Rivera, how quickly do you want me to make this woman's existence difficult? The federal government was about to introduce Patricia Ashford to consequences she never anticipated. Patricia's next action was pure panic wrapped in suburban power, and it almost ruined my family. 5 days after my JAG-E complaint, she contracted Eagle Watch Security to monitor neighborhood standards compliance. 4 guards in a white SUV with security displayed on the panels, recording my Jeep every 70 minutes like it was a terrorist danger. But that wasn't the genuine issue. The genuine issue was what they were spreading to the neighbors. Isabella called me in tears, her voice breaking over satellite link from some forsaken desert base. Tank, they're claiming you're dangerous. That military vehicles in residential zones create security threats. Mrs. Parker won't even look at me anymore. The sound of Isabella's crying mixing with desert wind through my phone made something frozen and solid settle in my chest. These people were destroying my family's standing while I couldn't protect them. My response had to be precise. But I was 9,500 miles distant, with restricted communication windows. I contacted Captain Martinez during my next approved call period, explaining how private security was monitoring federal task force gear. Her answer wasn't what I anticipated. Rivera, this is delicate. If we respond too forcefully, we confirm their accusations that your vehicle is dangerous. We need them to destroy themselves. The plot twist arrived when I remotely accessed my Jeep security network. Federal task force vehicles contain more monitoring technology than most police headquarters. Motion detectors, thermal cameras, GPS surveillance, and automatic photography of anyone within 19 feet. The recordings revealed something that froze my blood. Patricia wasn't just recording violations. At 2:31 in the morning, security footage captured her using a flashlight to inspect my Jeep's interior through the windows, photographing dashboard gear. Even attempting to access the doors. She was trying to reach classified federal monitoring equipment. But here's what truly frightened me. She wasn't operating solo. The footage showed her indicating specific features to the security guards who were capturing detailed photographs of federal communications gear. The neighborhood situation was falling apart, and Isabella was suffering the consequences. Parents at her school started questioning whether a military household with security concerns should be educating their children. Her administrator called her in for a discussion about community worries. The smell of chalk powder and fear filled Isabella's voice during our next conversation. "Tank, they're destroying my profession." Patricia informed the Parent Association that military households bring instability and security dangers to neighborhoods. "She's weaponizing my employment against me." That's when I realized this wasn't about my assets anymore. They were systematically destroying my family's livelihood, and I was powerless to prevent it from overseas. The texture of powerlessness tastes like sand and fury sitting in a communication bunker surrounded by the equipment of warfare. While some suburban terrorists dismantled my sister's existence back home, Patricia's security personnel escalated by approaching Isabella directly. The lead guard, some rejected officer with a power obsession, trapped her while she was purchasing groceries. "Ma'am, we need to address your brother's military operations," he stated, blocking her route to her car. "That vehicle contains gear that could present dangers to neighborhood safety. We need to understand what type of missions he might be conducting from that residence." Isabella, bless her teaching reflexes, started recording on her device. "Are you implying my brother, who's serving overseas defending our nation, is some type of danger to American households?" she asked, voice firm despite the tremor I could detect. The guard moved closer, violating personal space intended to frighten. "Military members sometimes bring back issues. PTSD, weapons, monitoring gear. We're just guaranteeing neighborhood safety." They were portraying me as a dangerous, potentially unstable veteran. Classic military discrimination disguised as neighborhood safety concerns. But Isabella's recording captured something beautiful. The guard confessing they were examining monitoring equipment in my vehicle. That statement just became proof in a federal espionage investigation. My response came through channels Patricia never anticipated. Captain Martinez contacted Eagle Watch Security's Federal Licensing Authority, notifying them their guards were performing unauthorized monitoring of classified government gear. The guards disappeared immediately, but their security firm now confronted federal investigation for espionage operations. Patricia's reaction to losing her muscle was pure terror. She submitted emergency complaints with every organization she could locate: law enforcement, fire services, code inspectors, even animal control. But she just established a paper trail documenting her fixation with federal assets. The conflict was intensifying, and I was still trapped overseas while my family absorbed casualties. But Patricia had no clue she'd just activated procedures that would bring the complete power of federal law enforcement down on her suburban empire. Patricia's desperation reached breaking point at 6:52 in the morning on a Thursday, and Isabella's security camera recorded every federal offense in crystal clarity. The sound I'll never forget. Clang, clang, clang. Bolt cutters biting through my security chain. Each metallic snap echoing through suburban morning stillness like gunfire. Isabella's phone buzzing me conscious in a deployment tent 9,500 miles distant. Her voice pure terror. "Tank, she's cutting your locks. She's got bolt cutters and a tow vehicle, and she's confiscating your Jeep right now." Through Isabella's phone camera, I witnessed Patricia Ashford commit multiple federal crimes in real time. Hair disheveled, still in her nightgown, she'd hired budget Benz towing with currency. No documentation, no questions, and was frantically directing them to load federal law enforcement assets onto their flatbed. Tow operator took one glance at the POAs, federal task force markings, and started retreating, like the vehicle was radioactive. "Lady, this is government assets with federal labels. I'm not touching this for any sum of money. It's abandoned property." Patricia screamed, her voice shattering with hysteria, saliva flying in the morning atmosphere. "I'm neighborhood president with legal power to remove community violations." That statement captured on 5 different security cameras just became Exhibit A in a federal theft investigation. My response was quick and devastating. I immediately contacted Captain Martinez through emergency protocols, activating procedures for theft of federal law enforcement gear. Within minutes, federal marshals were dispatched with lights and sirens to my grandmother's location. But here's the beautiful plot twist. My Jeep's hidden GPS, tracker, and remote security networks were recording everything automatically. Federal task force vehicles have kill switches, monitoring devices, and cameras that trigger when unauthorized movement is attempted. The instant Patricia cut my lock, she activated a federal alert network that pinned Homeland Security databases across 5 states. Isabella kept recording when Patricia made her fatal error. After the tow operator fled, leaving rubber marks on the pavement in his rush to escape, she changed the locks on the neighborhood entrance, effectively trapping my federal vehicle and preventing law enforcement access. If he wants his precious military truck returned, he can follow appropriate neighborhood procedures, she shrieked at Isabella, waving the new keys like some demented suburban warlord. Military duty doesn't place him above neighborhood expectations. The texture of powerless fury coursed through my veins as I watched this entitled suburbanite confiscate federal assets while my sister stood recording her breakdown. The smell of diesel fuel and terror sweat seemed to transmit through the phone link. Here's something important. Federal task force vehicles contain automatic monitoring and alert networks that trigger during unauthorized interference. Cutting locks or attempting to relocate these vehicles activates Homeland Security procedures, GPS monitoring, and federal response units. This isn't local offense. It's theft of classified government gear with terrorism enhancement possibilities. Confiscating federal law enforcement vehicles activates automatic national security warnings and federal task force action. It's not theft, it's potential terrorism. The neighborhood uprising started when Mrs. Parker witnessed Patricia's public breakdown from her front window. This kind elderly woman who'd survived the Great Depression and buried 4 military sons wasn't about to watch some neighborhood tyrant terrorize a deployed soldier's household. She contacted every neighbor, every veteran in Cedarwood, every decent person who'd been silently suffering under Patricia's reign of suburban terror. By 11:30, my grandmother's house was surrounded by protective neighbors, forming a human barrier around federal assets. This stops right here, right now, declared James Martinez, 75-year-old Vietnam veteran whose own son had completed 5 tours in Iraq. You want that boy's vehicle. You go through 38 American veterans first. Isabella's voice was stronger when she called me back, supported by a wall of neighborhood solidarity that made my throat tight with appreciation. Tank, you should witness this. The entire neighborhood is here. Mr. Martinez brought his American flag. Mrs. Chen is preparing coffee for everyone. They're not leaving. But Patricia's reaction to neighborhood resistance was pure suburban fascism, amplified to maximum. She submitted emergency complaints with every government organization in the directory. Law enforcement claiming veterans were creating armed militias. Fire services alleging explosive dangers from military gear. Code inspectors fabricating violations about unauthorized gatherings. Even animal control claiming emotional support animals were attack dogs. Each false statement was another federal offense. Submitting false reports about military members and federal assets carries serious consequences under multiple laws. The breaking point arrived when federal marshals reached Cedarwood Estates and discovered Patricia had changed the neighborhood entrance locks, preventing federal officers from accessing their own stolen assets. That's obstruction of federal justice. Marshal Rebecca Thompson, a no-nonsense federal officer who'd arrested cartel leaders and domestic terrorists, took one glance at the locked entrance and her face shifted from professional courtesy to predatory concentration. Ma'am, you block federal officers investigating theft of government assets. Open this entrance immediately or confront additional federal charges. Patricia's answer sealed her destiny forever. I don't acknowledge federal power over private neighborhood property. You people have no authority in my neighborhood. She just declared war on the United States government while standing in her nightgown. Game over. I arrived stateside 87 hours later, still tasting desert sand and adrenaline, to discover Isabella sitting in Grandma's kitchen, surrounded by enough proof to topple a small government. But it was the smell that struck me first, not Grandma's vanilla candles or fresh tamales. It was the scent of desperation and terror that had absorbed into these walls while I was gone. "Tank, you need to see this before the feds arrive," Isabella said, her hand shaking as she spread documents across Grandma's dining table. I discovered something that transforms everything. The manila folders held 7 years of neighborhood financial records, meeting notes, and correspondence that Isabella had somehow obtained through what she called her teaching network. But buried in the stack was a document that froze my blood. A contract between Ashford Urban Holdings and Westbrook Development Corporation, dated 8 months before I inherited Grandma's house. The subject line read, "Cedarwood Estates Acquisition Strategy Phase 4 Implementation." Tank, they weren't just harassing military households randomly, Isabella whispered, her teaching instincts having transformed her into an accidental investigator. They were systematically clearing properties for a massive construction project. The texture of aged documents crumbled between my fingers as I read the details. Gerald's firm had pre-sold 55 properties in Cedarwood to a national development corporation for luxury condominiums properties they didn't even control yet, including Grandma's house. "Look at the target list," Isabella said, pointing to an appendix that made me want to punch something. Every military household, every elderly resident, every person who couldn't resist bureaucratic harassment, all marked for acquisition facilitation. The Martinez family, the Thompson household, Grandma Maria, all targets in a coordinated campaign to force sales at below market prices. But here's the revelation that changed everything. Patricia had been forging neighborhood violations. Isabella showed me the original 1989 neighborhood bylaws, the genuine ones, not Patricia's fabricated versions. Military vehicles weren't just permitted, they were specifically protected under federal compliance requirements. Tank. She invented fake regulations and counted on people being too frightened or uninformed to verify. Isabella said, her voice gaining strength. But there's more. The neighborhood financial records revealed systematic embezzlement. Over 5 years, $219,000 in community funds have been diverted to Gerald's construction firm through fabricated consulting agreements and neighborhood improvement projects that never existed. Here's something important. When neighborhood boards divert community funds to personal businesses without resident consent, it becomes federal mail fraud if any communications cross state boundaries. The Racketeering Influence and Corrupt Organizations RICO Act applies. When these offenses form a pattern of criminal enterprise affecting the power dynamic hadn't just shifted. It had exploded. Federal prosecutors were about to inherit a RICO investigation involving fraud, conspiracy, civil rights violations, and elder abuse. But the real revelation, I wasn't fighting for my assets anymore. I was fighting for my grandmother's memory, and every household day destroyed. The war had just become personal in ways Patricia never anticipated. The war room materialized in Grandma's living room within 58 hours, and the irony wasn't lost on me. We were planning the destruction of suburban tyranny in the same space where she used to yell at telenovela villains. Isabella had transformed into something I'd never witnessed before. The scared teacher was gone, replaced by a strategic mastermind coordinating between federal officers, veteran networks, and an army of angry neighbors. The smell of serious government business, burnt coffee, stress sweat, and legal documents had replaced Grandma's vanilla candles forever. Captain Martinez arrived with 4 federal prosecutors and enough legal firepower to topple a small government. Assistant U.S. Attorney Diana Rodriguez spread Isabella's proof across every surface, shaking her head in amazement. Rivera, I've prosecuted cartel money laundering operations with less documentation than this. That's when she explained something that made my task force training click into place. Back in my federal crimes course, they taught us about RICO, the Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act. At the time, I thought it was just for mobsters and drug cartels. Turns out when suburban tyrants engage in systematic fraud and discrimination affecting multiple states, they become federal organized crime. Isabella's proof showed a pattern of criminal enterprise embezzlement, fraud, civil rights violations, all coordinated between Gerald's council position and Patricia's neighborhood authority. Interstate commerce was involved through Gerald's construction projects, which made it federal jurisdiction. The allies gathering in Grandma's living room looked like a resistance movement. James Martinez brought his Vietnam Veteran Network, 16 guys who survived actual wars and weren't intimidated by suburban corruption. Mrs. Parker contributed surveillance photographs, including shots of Patricia and Gerald's midnight meetings in the neighborhood center. Isabella's teacher union provided something I hadn't expected: media expertise. Educators know how to communicate complex issues to working households, and they've been waiting for a chance to support military families against discrimination. Sound of Isabella's increasingly confident voice, coordinating operations, filled rooms where Grandma once hummed Mexican lullabies. Watching my little sister command federal officers and neighborhood volunteers made something tight in my chest finally relax. The financial warfare strategy was personal for Isabella. She'd spent nights examining neighborhood records, her teacher brain recognizing patterns that reminded her of catching students who cheated on multiple assignments. The systematic embezzlement wasn't just theft, it was a violation of trust that offended her educator instincts. Tank, remember when Mom used to balance the household budget on this same table? Isabella said, pointing to forensic accountant spreadsheets showing $219,000 in diverted neighborhood funds. She taught us that stealing from families was the worst type of offense. Forensic accountant Sharon Walsh explained how Gerald's scheme functioned, selling houses to out-of-state developers before forcing current owners to sell. I remembered similar advance fee frauds from my financial crimes training. Promise future property, collect money up front, manipulate circumstances to deliver. Isabella had discovered email correspondence between Gerald and Westbrook Development, discussing displacement timelines for properties they didn't control. The texture of violation was visceral. These people had planned to steal Grandma's house before she even died. The surveillance network combined my military training with neighborhood determination. Hidden cameras, coordinated patrols, encrypted communications. Mrs. Parker's front window became command central. James Martinez's garage housed equipment, and Isabella's house served as communications hub. The recall election strategy came from Isabella's civics teaching experience. She'd always told her students that democracy only functions when citizens participate. Now she was proving it. Most people don't realize that neighborhood boards can be recalled through resident petitions, typically requiring 30 to 38% of homeowners to trigger special elections. Isabella's door-to-door campaign revealed the scope of Patricia's tyranny. The Williams family had documentation of racial harassment. The Patterson household had records of veteran discrimination. The elderly Anderson couple had been cited for excessive medical equipment, volume from their oxygen machine, within 87 hours. Isabella collected signatures from 75% of Cedarwood residents demanding immediate board removal. The smell of victory was mixing with desert dust still clinging to my uniform. Media strategy leveraged Isabella's teacher network connections. Military household harassment stories went viral in veteran communities, generating congressional attention. 5 representatives requested federal briefings on systematic neighborhood discrimination. The insurance fraud discovery was pure investigative instinct. Isabella found claims Patricia submitted for property damage caused by my Jeep damage that never existed. From my task force experience, I knew insurance fraud was federal. Prosecutors' favorite charge because it's easy to prove and carry serious consequences. Civil rights attorneys joined our coalition after reviewing discrimination patterns. Systematic targeting of military households violated federal fair housing regulations. Elder abuse against. Grandma activated additional federal protections worth millions in damages. Isabella's election as interim neighborhood president happened by acclamation at an emergency residence meeting. Her first act was freezing all accounts pending federal investigation. Watching her take the gavel in the same neighborhood center where Patricia had terrorized families for years, that was justice served cold. The stakes had evolved beyond personal vengeance. This investigation was becoming a national model for prosecuting neighborhood corruption, protecting military households, and proving that organized communities could defeat organized crime. But Patricia and Gerald had no clue the net was closing around them. Patricia's desperation turned criminal at 3:34 in the morning when Isabella's infrared cameras caught her in our backyard, frantically burning neighborhood financial records behind Grandma's tool shed. The acrid smell of burning documents and lighter fluid drifted through Isabella's bedroom window, mixing with the scent of terror sweat that seemed to follow Patricia everywhere now. She was hunched over a metal trash can like some suburban witch feeding documents to flames with shaking hands. Tank? She's destroying proof in our yard, Isabella whispered into her phone, watching through her bedroom window as Patricia fumbled with matches in the darkness. She's actually burning financial records while under federal investigation. My silent preparation had been building for weeks. Federal surveillance units were documenting every desperate action, every offense committed in panic. But watching this entitled suburban princess destroy proof of her own corruption, that was pure poetry. But Patricia's sabotage escalated beyond property damage into personal warfare that made my task force instincts kick into overdrive. Isabella discovered her car vandalized the next morning, all 4 tires slashed. Military trash spray painted across the windshield. In dripping red letters, the sound of broken glass crunching under Isabella's feet as she circled the damage made. Something frozen and calculating settled in my chest. The texture of powerless fury was familiar from deployment watching enemies attack people you can't protect. But this wasn't some foreign battlefield. This was suburban terrorism against my family. My counteraction was professionally satisfying. I called Captain Martinez, who made one phone call that changed everything. Federal Protective Detail was assigned to Isabella and other witness households. Not obvious security, but officers who could blend into morning runs and coffee shop visits. Patricia's surveillance was now being surveilled by people with security, clearances, and arrest powers. The neighborhood reaction was beautiful. James Martinez organized veteran patrols that made Patricia's midnight visits impossible. The sound of combat boots on pavement at 3 in the morning became the new neighborhood soundtrack. Mrs. Parker's kitchen became command central, coordinating protection schedules over homemade cookies and justified fury. But Gerald's desperation revealed corruption deeper than we'd imagined. Isabella discovered town council recordings where Gerald had pressured the police chief to ignore military household complaints. His arrogant voice echoing through Isabella's laptop made my federal training memories click into place. Back at the academy, they taught us about conspiracy charges. When public officials use their positions to systematically violate citizens' rights, it becomes federal civil rights conspiracy. Gerald wasn't just enabling Patricia, he was using government power to facilitate discrimination. These military people bring instability. Gerald's recorded voice dripped with entitlement. Their vehicles, their schedules, their problems affect property values and neighborhood character. That recording just became Exhibit A in a federal conspiracy investigation. Patricia's bribery attempt was captured on federal wire surveillance. She approached Isabella outside the grocery store, all a little bulgy with currency, her designer perfume unable to mask the stench of desperation. "This is $58,000 for your household," Patricia said, hands trembling as she pushed the envelope toward Isabella. "Military families deserve better neighborhoods anyway. Take this money. Find somewhere more suitable for your situation." Isabella, bless her teaching instincts, kept recording on her device while federal officers monitored from unmarked vehicles. From my federal crimes training, I knew attempted witness bribery carries 7-year mandatory minimums, but Patricia wasn't done committing federal crimes. She actually tried bribing federal officers through some private investigators she'd hired. With embezzled neighborhood funds, Patricia attempted to offer federal officers money to make this military situation disappear. The texture of pure stupidity was almost refreshing. She thought federal officers were as corrupt as her suburban kingdom. Federal officers don't just refuse bribes. They document them, record them, and add them to case files that ensure decades in federal prison. Gerald's political allies started fleeing like rats from a sinking ship. The mayor publicly distanced himself. Town council members demanded Gerald's resignation. His construction firm's stock price collapsed when corruption allegations hit state media. The smell of expensive cologne couldn't mask Gerald's panic during emergency council meetings. He tried using town resources to discredit federal investigations, claiming outside military agitators were targeting successful local businesses. Every abuse of office was being documented by federal officers who specialized in political corruption. Isabella started receiving death threats, anonymous notes under her windshield, distorted voicemails warning that accidents happen to teachers who don't mind their own business. The sound of Isabella's voice cracking during those threatening calls made something primal and protective roar to life in my chest, but my reaction was calculated federal precision. Threatening witnesses in federal investigations triggers FBI terrorism task forces. Every anonymous threat was being traced through phone records, handwriting analysis, and digital forensics that would make crime shows jealous. Patricia's final desperate action was filing false police reports claiming Isabella was mentally unstable and planning violent retaliation against neighborhood leaders. She actually told law enforcement that military households were forming armed militias in Cedarwood. Filing false reports about federal witnesses during active investigations isn't local offense. It's federal obstruction of justice with terrorism enhancements. The beauty of federal patience was watching Patricia destroy herself one offense at a time, while methodical officers built investigations ensuring she'd never terrorize another household. Patricia's final desperate gambit was a full-scale media assassination that revealed the true scope of her suburban criminal network. The attack struck Isabella's school first. Anonymous complaints flooded the district office, claiming she was radicalizing children with anti-government, military propaganda, and creating unsafe environments for civilian households. The sound of Isabella's voice cracking during her panicked phone call made my hands clench into fists. "Tank, they're trying to destroy my profession," she whispered from her empty classroom, the familiar smell of chalk powder and children's innocence now tainted with terror. "Parents are demanding I be fired." The administrator called me in for emergency discussions about my associations with unstable military elements. That's when I discovered Patricia had hired Collins and Partners, the same PR firm that whitewashes politicians after corruption scandals. They were portraying me as a dangerous veteran with PTSD who brought military-grade threats to peaceful suburban neighborhoods. The texture of manufactured lies felt different from enemy propaganda overseas. This was personal warfare designed to destroy families, not just missions. My silent preparation had been months in the making, and Isabella's documentation skills had evolved beyond anything I witnessed in federal training. She'd been recording every threat, every lie, every coordinated attack on our family's standing. But the smear campaign revealed something that made my task force experience kick into overdrive. Patricia wasn't working alone. She coordinated with neighborhood boards in 5 states to develop model policies for managing military household disruptions in suburban neighborhoods. This wasn't random harassment. This was systematic discrimination being exported nationwide. From my federal civil rights training, I knew conspiracy investigations that cross state boundaries trigger RICO prosecutions. When organizations coordinate to violate citizens' constitutional rights, it becomes organized crime. Isabella's counterpunch was beautifully devastating. Her students and parents organized a support rally that filled the school parking lot with American flags and signs reading "We support teacher Isabella and military families protect our freedom." The sound of fourth graders chanting "Thank you." Mr. Tank's sister echoed across the playground, where Isabella had spent years nurturing young minds. These children understood justice better than suburban adults, but Patricia's desperation reached criminal insanity when she hired private investigators to surveil Isabella's daily life. They followed her to school, photographed her interactions with students, documented her grocery shopping, even tracked her morning jog. The sound of telephoto camera lenses clicking outside classroom windows made something primal and protective roar to life in my chest. Isabella discovered listening devices planted in her car during one of their safety inspections. 4 separate surveillance gadgets, all traceable to Collins and partners through federal purchase records. The beauty of federal law is its clarity about electronic surveillance. During my task force training, they'd hammered home that unauthorized surveillance devices triggered the Wiretap Act, 22-year federal sentences when it involves witness intimidation. But planting devices in vehicles crosses into Homeland Security territory with terrorism enhancements. Captain Martinez's response was swift and federally devastating. The FBI's Counterintelligence Division took over Isabella's case, treating her surveillance as potential domestic terrorism. Suddenly, Patricia's suburban harassment was being investigated by people who hunt international criminals. The media explosion reached national levels when military advocacy networks discovered Isabella's story. Congressional representatives started demanding answers about systematic HOA discrimination against service families. The smell of national attention was like gasoline on Patricia's carefully constructed suburban image. Fox News called Isabella. CNN wanted interviews. Military Times ran front-page coverage of suburban warfare against military families. Gerald's political career died publicly during a live broadcast city council meeting. Federal agents served search warrants while cameras rolled, removing boxes of evidence as Gerald sat frozen in his council chair. The texture of absolute humiliation was visible on his face as reality crashed down. But Collins and partners made the fatal mistake that triggered federal hate crime investigations. They published a community safety report claiming military families brought elevated crime rates, domestic violence, and substance abuse to suburban neighborhoods. Fabricated statistics, false veteran crime data, deliberate misinformation designed to incite discrimination against protected classes. Isabella was reading the report when I saw her teacher instincts transform into righteous fury. Tank, they just attacked every military family in America with lies designed to make communities reject veterans. Publishing false information to incite discrimination against military families violates federal hate crime statutes. When it's coordinated for profit across multiple states, it becomes racketeering with civil rights conspiracy enhancements. The federal investigation exploded across 19 states as other military families came forward with similar harassment stories. Isabella's documentation methods became the model for federal prosecutors, building RICO cases against corrupt HOA networks. Isabella started receiving support emails from military spouses nationwide, sharing stories of fabricated violations, coordinated harassment, and systematic attempts to drive service families from suburban communities. The sound of Isabella's increasingly confident voice coordinating with federal attorneys filled rooms, where Grandma once told us stories about standing up to bullies. My little sister had evolved from victim to national advocate for military family rights. They thought they were fighting one teacher and one soldier, Isabella said, surrounded by federal case files documenting nationwide discrimination patterns. They were actually declaring war on every American family that serves this country. The public reckoning was about to arrive, and it would be federally spectacular. The Cedarwood Estates Community Center had never seen anything like this, packed beyond fire code limits with federal agents lining the walls. News cameras from 8 stations and military families from across 4 states who'd driven hours to witness suburban justice. The smell of righteous fury mixed with stale coffee and the electric tension of federal law. Enforcement about to demonstrate why you don't steal government property. Congressional representatives sat in the front row, taking notes for upcoming hearings on military family discrimination. Patricia arrived fashionably late in her white Lexus, pulling up to a gauntlet of protesters, holding signs reading Military Families Matter and Prosecute HOA Terrorists. The sound of her designer heels clicking across asphalt was drowned out by veterans, chanting thank you for your service directed at Isabella, not her. She entered like a deposed dictator making a final stand, Gerald shuffling behind with the broken posture of a man facing federal prison. The texture of pure panic radiated from both of them as they confronted a room full of families they'd systematically terrorize. Isabella took the podium first, no longer the frightened teacher being bullied by suburban tyrants. She'd evolved into something powerful, a national advocate whose voice now carried the authority of federal backing and congressional attention. For 6 years, these people used their positions to wage war against military families. Isabella began, her words echoing through speakers broadcasting live across social media platforms. They fabricated rules, embezzled funds, and coordinated discrimination campaigns that violated every principle. This country stands for thunder rolled through the community center as the crowd erupted in applause that shook the windows. Federal prosecutor Diana Rodriguez stepped forward with evidence boxes, representing months of investigation into what she called organized suburban crime. Her voice carried the weight of federal authority that makes criminals realize their amateur hour is over. The United States government has compiled overwhelming evidence of criminal conspiracy involving federal property theft, civil rights violations, witness intimidation, embezzlement, and obstruction of justice, she announced. Each charge hitting like a judicial sledgehammer. James Martinez spoke for the veteran community, his Vietnam voice trembling with emotion. My son served 5 tours protecting this country's freedom. These people thought they could spit on that sacrifice for their personal profit. Today they learned they were wrong, but the mic drop moment belonged to me. I approached the podium feeling Grandma's presence, her voice echoing in my memory. Stand up to bullies, Mio, but do it properly. This was the proper way. Patricia Ashford thought she was cutting locks on some soldier's personal vehicle. I said, my voice cutting through absolute silence. What she actually did was interfere with an active federal drug operation, compromise classified surveillance equipment, and steal property belonging to the United States government. The collective gasp that filled the room sounded like air being sucked from the building. That Jeep contained surveillance equipment worth $375,000 and evidence from ongoing cartel investigations spanning 5 states. When she cut those locks at dawn, she didn't just commit theft. She compromised national security operations that keep drugs off American streets and protect American families. Patricia's face went the color of old concrete as the true scope of her federal stupidity became clear. She graduated from suburban bully to someone who'd interfere with national security, but her real crime wasn't stealing my vehicle. I continued, feeling years of rage transforming into something cold and judicial. Her real crime was waging systematic warfare against military families, using government corruption to steal from the community that trusted her, and believing that suburban entitlement trumped federal law. The crowd exploded into standing ovation. Shouts of lock her up mixing with justice for our heroes as federal agents stepped closer to their targets. Federal Marshal Rebecca Thompson moved with practiced precision that spoke of years arresting people who thought they were above the law. She approached Patricia's seat with handcuffs and the kind of federal authority that can't be bargained with or bribed. Patricia Ashford, you're under arrest for theft of federal law enforcement property, conspiracy to violate civil rights, embezzlement of community funds, witness intimidation, and obstruction of federal justice. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut echoed through speakers as cameras captured the moment suburban tyranny met federal consequences. Patricia's expression shifted from defiance to the dawning realization that her suburban kingdom couldn't protect her from federal prison. Gerald tried fleeing through the back exit like the coward he'd always been, but ran straight into federal agents who'd anticipated exactly that move. His arrest was less dramatic, but equally satisfying. Watching corruption meet accountability in real time, the federal protection of military and law enforcement equipment had become brutally educational. These aren't just vehicles. They're classified government assets protected by laws carrying mandatory minimum sentences. When suburban terrorists interfere with federal operations, they discover that local corruption meets federal consequences with mathematical precision. Isabella was interviewed live by national media. Her transformation from terrorized teacher to military family advocate inspiring congressional action. This proves that organized harassment of military families is federal crime. She told cameras broadcasting to millions. No HOA board, no matter how corrupt, is above the United States Constitution. The taste of victory was sweeter than every memory of Grandma's kitchen. Mixed with the satisfaction of watching bullies discover that federal law doesn't negotiate. 19 months later, I stood in Grandma's kitchen reading the final sentencing report, and I could almost hear her voice saying, "Justice served the proper way." And my J.O. Patricia received 10 years in federal prison with no parole, plus $672,000 in restitution to affected families. The federal judge's words became legendary in legal circles. Your systematic harassment of military families represents domestic terrorism disguised as community governance. This court will not tolerate suburban tyranny. Gerald got 7 years and lifetime prohibition from public office. His development empire collapsed completely with $3.5 million in community settlements, ensuring that every family they'd harassed received compensation for years of suffering. But the real victory was watching our neighborhood transform from a place of fear into a community that protects its own. Isabella revolutionized HOA governance as the democratically elected president, implementing bylaws that became the national model for military family protection. The smell of fresh hope replaced the stale air of corruption as she unveiled the Cedarwood Military Family Bill of Rights. Federal protections written into community law. The Veteran Memorial Park sits where Patricia House once stood, seized through federal asset forfeiture and transformed by community vote. Children now play on swings where suburban tyranny once lived, their laughter echoing across grass that grows freely without ruler measurements. The Rivera Foundation for Military Family Rights became Isabella's calling. She left teaching to help families nationwide fight HOA discrimination, using our case as the blueprint for federal civil rights prosecution. Her documentation methods are now taught at FBI training academies. Grandma's house evolved into mission control for military family advocacy. The kitchen where she taught us about standing up to bullies now hosts strategy sessions with congressional staffers, constitutional lawyers, and families fighting their own suburban wars. The practical impact exceeded every hope. Congressional legislation now requires HOA financial transparency and protects military families from systematic harassment. The Tank Rivera Act provides federal oversight of community governance with criminal penalties for discrimination against service members. Most people never learn these facts that became our gift to American families. Military personnel have constitutional protections that override local ordinances. HOA boards can be recalled through resident petitions requiring only 27% of homeowners. Federal law treats systematic discrimination as organized crime punishable by decades in prison. Military families have federal rights that no HOA can override, and communities have power to remove corrupt boards when they organize together. The National HOA Corruption Database documented over 430 similar cases since our story went viral, triggering federal investigations that protected thousands of military families from suburban terrorism. Property values in Cedarwood increased 34% after corruption elimination, proving that justice is profitable and ethical governance attracts quality residents. Military families now specifically seek our community, knowing they'll be protected and celebrated. Isabella's transformation into a national advocate brought unexpected joy. She married Captain Jennifer Martinez's brother, Michael, a Navy veteran who moved to Cedarwood because our story proved military families could win against corruption. Their wedding reception filled the community center, where we'd watch federal justice delivered live. I found my own happiness with Sarah Rodriguez, the federal prosecutor who'd helped build our case. She transferred to local operations, and we bought the house next to Grandma's. Waking up every morning in the neighborhood we fought to protect feels like victory served. Daily, the Rivera Military Scholarship Fund, created from lawsuit settlements, has sent 26 military children to college. Each graduation ceremony reminds youth that one family's courage can transform entire communities and create opportunities for the next generation. Mrs. Parker, now 92 and still the neighborhood's conscience, cuts the ribbon at every community event. Your grandmother knew you'd do something special. She tells me during park dedications, her eyes bright with satisfaction. She just didn't know you'd save the whole neighborhood. The moment that made everything worthwhile came during our first annual Freedom Day celebration. Hundreds of military families gathered in the park where Patricia's tyranny once lived, sharing stories of victory over suburban corruption, the sound of children's laughter mixing with veterans' pride, the smell of barbecue and freedom filling air once poisoned by fear, the texture of Isabella's hand in mine as we watch families gather safely in the community Grandma loved. But my favorite moment happens every morning when I see Old Glory flying over houses where military families live without fear of harassment. This is what victory tastes like. Justice served, community healed, and the knowledge that bullies can be defeated when good people organize and fight back. Where are you from? Tell us in the comments below. And if you're loving this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more.